Thank you. Thank you, Tim, for choosing the Geneva Graduate Institute for the world premiere of this documentary. And thank you for all the work you've been doing over the last decades to keep on repeating the same message, to raise awareness. I mean, this is very important, and sadly, you're going to have to continue doing so for a little while. Okay, so we're now going to take 15 minutes for Q&A from the audience. So we have already a question here. Please introduce yourself first. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Flannery. So I am Shankar Banerjee. I am a fellow at CERN, a particle physicist. So it's a very, very interesting documentary. So mine is more of a comment than a question. So I've been following these climate actions for the last decade or so. I'm not an expert in this field, but have been reading a lot. So what surprises me a lot is that is the lack of mention of animal agriculture when it comes to climate change, because we know that around 25% of the world's emission comes from from agriculture. Close to 40% of our habitable land goes towards animal agriculture. Close to 70% of our fresh water, which is a limited resource, goes towards agriculture, of which the lioness's share is taken by animal agriculture. And 78% of eutrophication happens because of agriculture, and the species extinction issue, which is caused because of land use, which is also one of the major driving forces, is animal agriculture. So at the moment, only 4% of our biomass is wild animals, whereas 60% of it is livestock animals. So I've heard some of the speakers before, like Johan Rockström and others, who have given examples of, like, for example, feeding algae to cows, or, for example, doing rotation crops. But none of the peer-reviewed studies actually hold the feasibility of these. So why aren't climate scientists talking about this at all? Because right now, going plant-based from an individual point of view is the strongest step that we can take. We are talking about fossil fuels, which is very, very important. Coal mining, stopping these are a big part, but like, if we do not talk about, there are studies in Nature and Science which are coming out every single month, which show again and again and again. So unless we change our diets to a predominantly plant-based one, we cannot meet the 2-degree climate goal in the next decade or so. So I would like to have your thoughts on this. Thank you.
Sure. Look, first of all, thank you so much for taking time out of your very important work to be here and staying longer. And the question is a very relevant one. And there is no doubt that we need to change our diets. We also need to change the fundamentals of agriculture, because even plant production, as we do it now, is not sustainable. So, you know, the broadacre wheat production, for example, and grain production globally is really, it's causing a lot of problems with the soils. And as you said, mentioned runoff and erosion and everything else. So there's no doubt that's a really important part of the problem. I agree with you that it doesn't get enough, recognition. The reason people focus on fossil fuels, however, is that the carbon that's locked away in fossil fuels has been out of the linked biosphere system for hundreds of millions of years. So the stuff that's coming out of agriculture is coming in and out of the linked biosphere system. But the material from the fossil fuels is really additional to any carbon in the system. So the reason why the focus is on that is because it is this additional material which you then have to get rid of somehow out of the system. And it's overwhelming the capacity of Earth's climate system to draw down that additional carbon. So I think you're right, we need a more nuanced approach. But at the big climate meetings, it's the biggest issue that takes the agenda. And that's been, it's been fossil fuels, 75% of the problem. And it's been a really intractable problem to deal with. So that is, rightly or wrongly, the primary focus of the mega meetings, such as the COPs. But you're quite right, we need a more nuanced response. Not only do we need to deal with agriculture, we need to deal with drawdown. We need to get some of the gas out of the air now if we're to get to 1.5 degrees. So there's a whole series of things that we are not dealing with simply, I think, because that fossil fuel problem has been so intractable.
I just want to back up Shanka's point. I'm also a physicist at CERN, but and my name's Sophie. Yeah, just to back that up, I mean, you mentioned that it doesn't get as much attention as it should, but in your documentary, in this documentary, which was wonderful, by the way, I really enjoyed it. It was disappointing that you talked about deforestation being one of the leading causes of climate change, and one of the leading causes of deforestation is animal agriculture, and in particular, the tropical rainforest is cattle ranching. So I would ask, why do you not put that in your documentary? Is there some political reason? I mean, it seems to me like, yeah.
Look, the reason really was we had 55 minutes to make a documentary about climate leadership.
Okay.
And the thing I was interested in was, how do leaders lead, under what circumstances? Do they do it, and how do you do it? And I think that the key messages we were following was that that listening to people, including people, empowering people. They're the key things. So the documentary isn't so much about the climate problem itself, although it obviously touched on it here and there. The focus was on something a little bit different, which was leadership. But we did try to include, I mean, I made sure that the protest banners all got their moment in the sun. So it clearly is an issue, but unpacking that whole thing would have been another documentary, I fear, to make.
We had a question here, yeah.
Thank you very much. Professor, I'd like first to thank you for being one of the very few reasons left for Australians to feel proud. So thank you for all the work that you've done. I was told to mention cricket, but my name is Beres Gwyn. I've been working in the international development space for quite a number of years. You mentioned, in terms of leadership, the role of communication and knowing how to pitch the message. The two questions that I have for you are that in Geneva, where innovative financing, impact investing, sustainable financing is very much a hot topic, when we have gone to them with scalable, commercially viable initiatives, food, water, waste, energy, environment, and climate, in what I call the majority tercile of the economic pyramid, we're asked, where's your business model? Because the investors, I would suggest more than 80% of those who come to the impact investing conferences are waiting for a business model that reflects the old economy. So do you know of cases where with academic or business support, there's been work done on the business architecture so that these new technologies don't just trickle down over the next 100 years, but could go straight to the majority tercile? My first question. The second question is, when we're talking about how to measure progress, we failed to convince the United Nations to bring in new indicators for the SDGs and to insist on arm's length reporting. Instead, we've ended up with country-by-country reporting on the old indicators. We're past CSR. I think we're past ESG. Because we need new metrics both to measure progress and also to incentivize the change. But where do we have anything approaching what could be regarded as a gold standard for truly SDG or climate goal focused investing? Have you come across anything that comes close to that?
Look, thank you. Thanks for your questions, and they're obviously very, very important questions, pertinent questions. If I take a back seat and look at this as a kind of in a bigger trajectory of history, what I see at the moment is that with the COPs, we have world leaders sitting down there trying to redesign the world energy system, but they're doing it in an old paradigm, and they don't really comprehend what that means. The people that do comprehend what that means are those people who are demonstrating in the streets. The young people who, as you noticed from the signs, aren't just demonstrating about climate or energy, they're demonstrating about social justice, about a new economic system. They understand that all of these things are interlinked and all must change to create a new paradigm of the way we live on the planet. But we as society haven't yet made that mental step. I mean, my great hope is that in 20 years' time, those demonstrators who are now outside the meeting will be in the negotiations, that they'll be the leaders of tomorrow who will be saying, oh, not just how we can fix, how can we change the energy system? They'll be saying, how do we change the economic system? How do we agree to change the social issues we face? So I think we're in this period of transition, but we haven't yet understood the full implications of living sustainably on the planet, really, and climate change being a core front and centre issue and probably the driver of that bigger debate, if that makes sense. And I'm sorry, in terms of the specifics about business cases, I don't know. I just think we have to change. We have to develop a different understanding of our relationship with the earth.
One more question here.
Tim, great to hear you. Super film, much appreciated it. I do have a claim to Australia, which is currently an adjunct professorship in the University of New South Wales, but I'm still left puzzled at the end of it. You've kept stressing, and in your responses, that we need leadership, we haven't got time. Where is the leadership globally at this moment? We don't have time. We've all worked, many of us here have worked in the UN system. We've got a defunct, ineffective UN Secretary General who does bugger all these days, if you excuse the Australian phrase. And you've got wonderful examples in your own country too. One of the things that really appealed to me very much was the port of Newcastle, which is one of the main coal exporting ports in Australia. It's going to go carbon neutral to organise its coal exports. I can't think of anything more contradictory in my life, but where do you sit in terms of how are we going to get this leadership in the next 2 years, 1 year, 2 years? We haven't even got the decade. You said a minute ago in one of your responses, I hope in 20 years' time these people are there. 20 years' time is too late.
It absolutely is too late. So we have to have solved the climate problem by then, but these broader issues of how we relate to the planet and reforming the economic system and getting greater social justice, the things that young people are so passionate about, they're the things I can't see changing in the shorter term. But look, the film is really to provoke this debate. How do we get the leadership? I don't have all the answers. I don't think anyone does. But to see a little bit more clearly what that leadership actually involves and how it can be done, I think is important. And that's why I wanted to make the documentary, to try to, and it highlights that lack of leadership, as you say, at the highest levels. So I hope that it's the beginning of a discussion. It's not a solution, it's simply the beginning of a discussion. But thank you, Peter, and thank you for all you do in our region. Peter is working in Melanesia, in Papua New Guinea, where he's particularly involved, I hope you don't mind me saying, Peter, with health issues for women, and there is no more critical issue in the region, really, than that. So thank you for what you do.
Name is Abraham. I hope I'm not going to send any wrong signals around this room, but indeed, it's leadership that's needed. But how do you get leadership to work for 30, 40 years when already the present leadership may not be there by 2030? Who are the people who should be handed this task of seeing an A to Z job done? And I think it's important that someone articulates how you go about it, because there's no point in talking about 2030, 2040, 2050, when, as you rightly said, we don't have even 10 years ahead of us. So do we live with that lack of breath for 10 years and hope that the next 10 years will be better? So I think this leadership question has to be addressed much, much more comprehensively. And And the solving of the problems has to start now and across the globe.
You're quite right. And look, can I just say that the subtitles weren't done on the film either, but the man, Matt Keane, who spoke towards the end, is a conservative politician. He belongs to a party where many members are climate denialists. In Australia, he's a treasurer in New South Wales, the largest state in the country, and he brokered a deal, as he said, with every party. It's unprecedented in the history of Australian politics. Brokered a deal to eliminate carbon, eliminate coal from our electricity sector by 2030. And that was from the conservative side of politics. So that sort of leadership is what I hope to see more of. And you need, I think, we need to foster that leadership. It's about listening, as he says. And I don't have those skills. I look at Chief Esau and Matt Keane in utter admiration because they do have the political skills to be leaders. But you're right, we need more of them and we need them now.
We have a few more questions on that side. Can I suggest that we collect questions for the sake of time? So first you and then after.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for sharing this very personal documentary as well with us, Tim. It was really incredible to see. My question is actually, I was really surprised when I started looking into the history of climate negotiations and also the global distribution of emissions to see the lack of leadership that is Australia in this regard. And I thought it was very surprising because I feel like Australia has very good soft power representation. Many people look up to it, also in like pop culture. So I wondered, how is it that Australia got stuck or sucked into this path of lack of leadership in regard of climate, given that it's actually from the outset a very promising example for climate leadership?
Well, look, we are the world's largest exporter of natural gas and of coal by calorific value. So 2 of the 3 fossil fuels, we're the world's largest exporter. There's a vast amount of money being made in Australia, and vested interests protect their assets and, buy political power. It's really sad, but that is the truth of it.
Next.
Hi, thank you so much for the film. It was really wonderful. My name's Lillian. I'm from Australia. My parents are huge fans. They told me to tell you that. So I'm a student here. I'm a PhD candidate at the Institute working on international environmental law and Indigenous participation. And in my mind, particularly in the Australian context, I think that we have the leadership and we have the recipes for paradigm shifting, and those are in Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous hands and in Indigenous knowledge systems. And I really appreciated the part of the film where you talked to the Solomon Islands leaders and brought in that kind of aspect, and also the interviews that you had with Indigenous Australians. And I wonder if you had any reflections or indications or suggestions for the way forward on how to better incorporate those voices, how to raise those voices, and how to start incorporating those knowledge systems in our responses. Thank you.
Wow, that's a very, very complex question. Look, in parts, what I've been working with those Solomon Islands groups, helping them create structures that let them engage with a broader world. So the peace ceremony we did was incredibly important, but then we set up a thing called the Baru Conservation Alliance, which was a community conservation alliance, which is properly constituted with a board and a bank account and a CEO and all the rest, that lets them accept money, grant money. They're now running an organisation that takes probably $500,000 to $1 million a year in grant funding to protect their forests, to become more climate resilient, and to address some kind of urgent social and economic issues they've got. So for me, that's kind of the way forward there. For Australia, it's different. The Indigenous voice, we need to amplify that voice, and we need to have it recognised how important it is. That is slowly happening, but we need to accelerate that process, I think. Look, I'm aware that we are getting on. We're over time already, so anyone who does want to go, please do go.
We have one more question here.
Thanks a lot. Also an Australian. just building a little bit on what was just said, my question is really about sort of where to look for leadership, and certainly in Australia it's really obvious that the national level has failed entirely, but we see some more hope in the example given of Matt Keane, but at the state level, and I think also, you know, at council level as well. There's lots of councils doing a lot of good work. And I think we can see that also in the US, where there's been some major achievements at the state level, but not at the federal level. So just wondering if you had any thoughts about that. And I mean, for my mind in Australia, it's to do with, you know, where the power lies and where vested interests are most entrenched, I suppose. Yeah.
Look, at the federal level's the hardest one to shift, no doubt about it, in Australia and in the US. It's the ultimate area of power, so the fossil fuel lobby groups focus there as much as they can. They get the biggest bang for their buck in doing that. And also it's the level of government that's most removed from accountability by the individual people. You know, if a local mayor in a town makes a decision, he's bound to hear about it when he goes for a haircut or have a meal or whatever, you know. And a state politician, likewise, is likely to you know, encounter people around them that will give them feedback. At the federal level, it's much more remote. So I think that, in my mind at least, that accounts for the slowness at the federal level. But we do have an election in Australia in 2 weeks or so it'll be interesting to see what happens. So thank you so much for your questions.
Okay, we'll take the last 2 questions before we close the event.
Hi, thank you so much for the documentary. I have a question more, maybe specifically bringing it back to Switzerland, because when I was looking at this documentary, I was thinking that leadership needs popular support. And last year we had an election about the Climate Act in Switzerland, which was not ideal, but the parliament decided on a way of adapting the Paris Agreement into Switzerland, and it did not pass popular support. Yeah. So we didn't accept it as a population. So I'm asking myself, how can you can see climate action from youth and really popular support of people going to the streets, but it doesn't go to the popular majority. Yeah. So how can we solve this issue?
Well, I think if you were asking Chief Esau, he would say you've got to consult with everyone. You've got to go right down to that level, the household level, foster a debate and ask people what they really think. What are the problems? Why aren't they voting to support this? You know, and with that deeper engagement, you can deal with some of the myths that are holding us back. I think it's a very difficult thing to do in a society as large as Switzerland, but it can be done. You can have, you know, meetings at the town hall level here, at the school level, whatever. You know, when I was climate commissioner in Australia, we tried to get around to as many places as we could in Australia to talk to people directly. So a sort of an institution perhaps in Switzerland that was something like a climate council or climate commission that was responsible for engaging with the public is probably an important way forward.
And we'll take a last question.
I'll make this very quick. Harvey Parafina, an alumnus here at the Institute. What are you expecting for COP27 this November? More concretely, because I know I've seen, thank you for the documentary, and I know, but yeah. more concretely at least.
Yeah. Look, I hope that the COP27 will be the first COP where we really get to grips with adaptation and with these issues of social inequality and the fact that the developing countries of the world are really suffering the damage, and that the developed world needs to actually account for that and pay for that. So I hope we'll make progress in those areas, because, you know, COP26 was really where we took the fossil fuel debate as far as we could at that point. Clearly at the end we didn't get the coal element, but I think we need to refresh the COP process now and focus on those very, very important areas.
So on this, looking forward to COP27, it's time to close the event. So thank you very much to all of you for being here tonight, and huge thanks to Professor Tim Flannery for allowing us to see this world premiere of the documentary and for being with us tonight. So we look forward to seeing you again in Geneva. Thank you again.